I'm Amber 32, and until recently, I thought my 6-year marriage to Ryan was rock solid. We built our life in suburban Seattle, complete with weekend brunches and holiday traditions. I trusted him completely. That's the thing about trust, though. It takes years to build and only minutes to shatter. One phone call about his sick mother was all it took to unravel everything. What I discovered that day changed my definition of betrayal forever. If you're watching this from somewhere where trust was broken too, take a moment to hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're from. Trust me, what happened next changed my definition of betrayal forever. I met Ryan at a marketing conference in Chicago 8 years ago. I was there representing my design agency, and he was giving a presentation on financial analytics. There was this immediate spark between us, the kind you read about but don't really believe exists until you experience it yourself. He asked for my number before his presentation was even over, and we ended up having dinner together that night. By the time I flew back home to Seattle, we'd spent every possible minute together, talking until sunrise in the hotel lobby. Our romance moved quickly. Some might say too quickly. 4 months after meeting, he proposed during a weekend trip to the San Juan Islands. I remember standing on that beach, the sunset painting everything gold, and thinking I was the luckiest woman alive. Ryan was charming, attentive, and seemed completely devoted to me. When friends asked if it was too soon, I brushed their concerns aside. When you know, right? We had a small wedding ceremony at my parents' waterfront home just outside Seattle. Just close family and friends, twinkle lights in the trees, and my dad grilling his famous cedar plank salmon. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect for us. Ryan's mother, Margaret, came up from Portland with his sister, Jessica. I remember being nervous about meeting them, but they welcomed me warmly into their family. After the wedding, we settled into our life together in Seattle. I worked remotely as a graphic designer for several clients across the country, which gave me the flexibility to create our home while building my career. Ryan worked at a financial consulting firm downtown, often putting in long hours, but always making time for us on weekends. We fell into a comfortable routine: morning coffee together before work, Friday night dinners at our favorite Italian place, and Sunday hikes when the weather allowed. Our friend circle consisted mostly of Ryan's work colleagues and their partners, plus a few of my college friends who lived nearby. We hosted dinner parties, joined a wine club, and took cooking classes together. From the outside, I'm sure we looked like the perfect couple. Ryan's family dynamics were a bit more complicated. His mother, Margaret, lived in Portland, about a 3-hour drive away. She'd been widowed when Ryan was in college and had developed a somewhat dependent relationship with her son. His sister, Jessica, lived in the same neighborhood as Margaret, which helped, but Ryan still felt responsible for his mother's happiness. There was a closeness there, but also tension at times, especially when Margaret would call with emergencies that often turned out to be minor issues she could have handled herself. Despite the occasional family drama, our visits to Portland were usually pleasant. Margaret would cook elaborate meals, and we'd spend weekends helping her with home projects or taking her to her favorite gardens. I developed my own relationship with Jessica, who quickly became more than just a sister-in-law. We texted regularly and occasionally had girls' weekends together when Ryan was traveling for work. Looking back, I can see the first subtle signs of change about 2 years into our marriage. Ryan started working later, coming home exhausted and distracted. He became protective of his phone, taking it with him even for short trips to the bathroom. At the time, I dismissed these changes as stress from work. His firm was going through a restructuring, and he'd mentioned the possibility of layoffs. I told myself he was just focused on securing his position. I remember one night, about a year before everything fell apart, watching him from across our living room. He was staring at his phone, completely absorbed, a small smile playing on his lips. When he noticed me looking, he quickly put the phone away and suggested we watch a movie. That was the first moment I felt a flutter of unease, but I pushed it down. He was my husband, my partner, my best friend. I trusted him completely, I had no idea how dramatically that trust would be tested, and the changes in Ryan became impossible to ignore about 3 months before the incident. It wasn't just one big thing, but a series of small disconnections that added up to something troubling. I'd reach for his hand while walking, and there'd be a slight hesitation before he took it. Our conversations became superficial. Work talk, household logistics, nothing deeper. The man who used to tell me everything seemed to be holding back essential parts of himself. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to find his side of the bed empty. I padded downstairs to find him in the kitchen texting someone. When he saw me, he quickly put the phone face down on the counter. "Who are you texting at this hour?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just Baker," he said, referring to his colleague. "We're up against a deadline for the Westridge account." It was a reasonable explanation, but something about the way he avoided eye contact made my stomach tighten. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I checked our credit card statement online. There were charges I couldn't account for: a restaurant in Cannon Beach I'd never heard of, a high-end hotel bar downtown. On a night he'd told me he was working late, a significant charge at a jewelry store that wasn't for anything I'd received. Then there was the cologne. Ryan had worn the same scent since I met him. A woody, spicy fragrance I'd given him for his birthday our first year together. But suddenly, he was wearing something different. Lighter, more citrusy. When I mentioned it, he shrugged and said the store was out of his usual brand. But the bottle of his regular cologne was still half full in our bathroom cabinet. The weekend work commitments started piling up too. Previously, weekends had been sacred time for us, but now he was constantly being called away for emergency client meetings or team-building retreats. I offered to drive him once, and he almost snapped at me, insisting he needed his car in case things ran late. I began doubting myself. Was I creating problems that weren't there? Was I being paranoid? I tried to focus on my design projects, but my concentration suffered. I'd stare at my screen for hours, making little progress, my mind spinning with scenarios I didn't want to imagine. One evening, when the distance between us felt particularly vast, I finally confronted him. "Ryan, something's different between us. You're distant. You're secretive with your phone. You're barely present, even when you're home. What's going on?" He looked annoyed, then dismissive. "You're imagining things, Amber. I've been swamped at work. Not everything is about you." His words stung. In all our years together, he'd never spoken to me that way. But instead of pushing back, I retreated. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was being self-centered, not understanding the pressure he was under. I decided to make more effort. I planned special date nights, cooking his favorite meals and wearing dresses I knew he liked. I suggested a weekend getaway to the mountains, a place we'd always found reconnection before. For a brief time, things improved. He seemed more attentive, more like the Ryan I'd married. But within weeks, the distance returned even more pronounced than before. Around this time, I had lunch with Jessica when she was in Seattle for a work conference. She asked how things were with Ryan, and something in her tone made me look up sharply. "Has he seemed different to you?" I asked carefully. She hesitated. "Maybe a little. Last time he visited Mom alone, he was on his phone constantly. Mom thought he was working, but he was smiling at that phone like it was telling him jokes." Her observation sent a chill through me. It wasn't just in my head. Someone else had noticed too. The physical toll of my suspicion was becoming unbearable. I couldn't sleep, lying awake listening to Ryan's breathing, wondering what he was dreaming about. Or who. My appetite disappeared, and I lost weight that I couldn't afford to lose. My client work suffered as I found it impossible to focus on design problems when my personal life felt like it was built on shifting sand. Then came the phone call that I wasn't supposed to hear. I arrived home early from a client meeting that had ended sooner than expected. Ryan was in our home office, the door slightly ajar. His voice had a warmth, a tenderness I hadn't heard directed at me in months. "I can't wait to see you too," he was saying softly. "I'm figuring it out. Soon, I promise. When he emerged from the office and saw me standing there, he jumped slightly. "That was Baker," he said quickly. "About the presentation next week." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Baker was a 58-year-old man with a gruff voice and manner. Whoever Ryan was talking to, it wasn't Baker. Something inside me was breaking, but I still wasn't prepared for what came next. It was a Saturday morning like any other. I was making blueberry pancakes, Ryan's favorite, still clinging to the hope that I could somehow fix whatever was wrong between us. He was sitting at our kitchen island, scrolling through his phone as usual when it rang. I watched his expression change as he answered. First surprise, then concern, then a quick glance at me before he stepped into the living room. When he returned, his face was pale. "It's my mom," he said, running a hand through his hair. "She's been taken to the hospital, some kind of fainting episode. Jessica's not answering her phone. I need to get down there." "I'll come with you," I said immediately, already mentally canceling my plans for the day. "No," he said too quickly. "You know how Mom gets in these situations. She'll be embarrassed enough without an audience. Plus, there might be family drama with Jessica not being there. I'll handle it better alone." It made sense, sort of. Margaret was a proud woman who hated appearing vulnerable. Still, in the 5 years I'd known her, she'd never refused my presence during difficult times. I watched as Ryan rushed upstairs to pack an overnight bag. He moved with a nervous energy that seemed excessive even for the situation. When he came back down, I noticed he was wearing the new cologne again, stronger than usual. "Let me know when you get there," I said as he headed for the door. "And give Margaret my love." He kissed me distractedly, a quick peck that barely landed on my cheek. "Don't wait up. I might stay at Mom's tonight, depending on how she's doing." The door closed behind him, and our house felt suddenly hollow. I cleaned up the half-eaten breakfast, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my stomach. Something didn't feel right, but I told myself I was being paranoid again. His mother was in the hospital. Of course, he was acting strangely. I tried to distract myself with work, but after an hour of staring blankly at my computer screen, I couldn't shake my unease. Ryan hadn't texted to say he'd arrived, which wasn't like him even with our recent distance. I texted him a casual, "How's Margaret doing?" but received no response. Another hour passed. The silence from Ryan's end grew louder in my mind. Before I could talk myself out of it, I called Jessica. If Margaret was in the hospital and Jessica wasn't answering her phone, maybe she'd seen it by now and was with her mother. "Hey, Amber," Jessica answered cheerfully. "What's up?" Her tone immediately set off alarm bells. There was no stress, no hospital waiting room echo, no concern about her mother. "I was just checking on Margaret," I said carefully. "How is she doing?" There was a pause. "Mom, she's fine. We're actually having lunch at her place right now." "Why?" The room seemed to tilt around me. "Ryan said she was in the hospital, that she had some kind of fainting episode." Another pause, longer this time. "Amber, that's not true. Mom is perfectly fine. We're eating the lasagna she made from scratch. Do you want to talk to her?" My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. No, I managed. There must have been some misunderstanding. I'll talk to Ryan." "Is everything okay?" Jessica asked, concern evident in her voice now. "I'm not sure," I said honestly. "I'll call you back." After hanging up, I ran to the bathroom and threw up my body, physically rejecting the truth my mind was still processing. Ryan had lied. Blatantly, deliberately lied about his mother being ill. The question was, why, and where was he really going? I sat on the bathroom floor, trying to steady my breathing. Part of me wanted to call him immediately to confront him with what I knew. But another part, a stronger part, needed to see for myself. I needed to know exactly what was happening before I confronted him. With shaking hands, I checked the Find My app on my phone. Ryan and I had set it up years ago for practical reasons, to know when the other was heading home from work to find each other in crowded places. I'd never used it to track him before, had never felt the need. Until now. The blue dot showing his location was moving steadily south on I-5. He was indeed heading in the direction of Portland, which confused me momentarily. If he was having an affair, why go south? But then, Portland wasn't his only possible destination on that route. I made a split-second decision that would change everything. I grabbed my purse, a bottle of water, and a granola bar. I texted my friend Natalie that I might need to crash at her place that night, not explaining why. Then I got in my car and started the engine, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was going to follow my husband and discover where he was really going, and who he was going to see. The initial part of my pursuit was nerve-wracking. I kept enough distance to avoid being spotted in his rearview mirror, but close enough not to lose him in traffic. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was acting like someone in a thriller movie, not a trusted wife of 6 years. For the first hour, Ryan drove exactly as expected, heading south on I-5 toward Portland. I almost turned around several times, feeling ridiculous and paranoid. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding with Jessica. Maybe Margaret had recovered quickly from whatever episode had sent her to the hospital. But then, near Olympia, Ryan took an unexpected exit. Instead of continuing south, he veered west toward the coast. My stomach dropped. There was no reason to head toward the ocean if he was visiting his mother in Portland. I followed at a greater distance now, the roads becoming narrower and less crowded as we approached the Pacific. The landscape changed from suburban sprawl to dense evergreen forests that occasionally opened to reveal glimpses of the ocean. On any other day, I would have found it beautiful. Today, each mile increased my dread. As I drove, memories flooded back unbidden. Ryan and I walking hand in hand along Cannon Beach during our first year together. His proposal at sunset, the ring glinting in the golden light. The weekend trips we'd taken to coastal bed and breakfast, drinking wine and watching storms roll in from our window. Had those moments been real? Had he truly loved me then? Or had our entire relationship been leading to this moment of betrayal? I nearly lost him in Centralia when I got stuck at a red light. My heart raced as I watched his car disappear around a bend. But luckily, the road had few turns, and I caught sight of him again after a minute of panicked driving. I was being reckless, I knew, but I couldn't turn back now. After about 2.5 hours of driving, Ryan pulled into the parking lot of an upscale florist in a small coastal town. I parked across the street, ducking down as he walked into the shop. Through the large front windows, I could see him selecting flowers. Not a simple bouquet, but an elaborate arrangement of what looked like roses and orchids. Not the kind of thing you bring to a hospital room. Not the kind of thing you bring to your mother. Each small discovery was like a physical blow. I sat in my car, watching as he returned with the flowers carefully placed on his passenger seat. He checked his appearance in the rearview mirror, straightening his collar and running a hand through his hair. The gesture was so familiar, it made my chest ache. I continued following him as he drove another 15 minutes up the coast, eventually turning onto a private road that led to several oceanfront properties. From a distance, I watched him park in front of a modern A-frame house with large windows facing the water. The property looked expensive, not a casual rental, but something booked well in advance. I parked on the main road out of sight and walked back, staying hidden among the trees that lined the private drive. From this vantage point, I could see the front of the house, but wasn't easily visible from it. I felt simultaneously ridiculous and justified, like I was playing a part in someone else's life. Ryan got out of his car, grabbed the flowers and his overnight bag, and approached the front door. He didn't knock. Instead, he tapped something into his phone, likely texting his arrival. Moments later, the door opened. The woman who appeared was not his mother. She was younger than me by several years, tall and willowy, with long dark hair. She wore a casual but elegant outfit, the kind of effortless look that actually takes considerable effort. She threw her arms around Ryan's neck the moment she saw him, and he lifted her slightly off the ground in an embrace that spoke of familiarity and passion. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle any sound that might escape. Even from a distance, their body language was unmistakable. This wasn't a new acquaintance or a casual fling. The way they moved together, the comfort in their touch, suggested a relationship that had developed over time. They disappeared inside the door, closing behind them. I stood frozen among the trees, unsure what to do next. Part of me wanted to storm up to the house and confront them immediately. Another part was too shocked to move. In preparing myself for the possibility of an affair, I'd still somehow not believed it would be true. Not Ryan, not us. I returned to my car and sat there as the afternoon light began to fade. Through the windows of the A-frame, I could see them moving about, sometimes embracing, sometimes talking animatedly. At one point, they stood on the deck overlooking the ocean, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. The casual intimacy of the gesture made me feel sick. As night fell, lights came on in the house, creating a warm glow that only emphasized my position outside in the dark alone. I sat in my car watching the illuminated windows of my husband's secret life, wondering how we had come to this and what I would do next. I couldn't bear to watch anymore. The cozy domestic scene playing out in the A-frame was too painful, each glimpse of their intimacy, another knife twisting in my chest. I drove to a motel about 10 minutes away, a dated place with a flickering vacancy sign and faded floral bedspreads. The bored clerk barely looked at me as I paid cash for one night. In the harsh fluorescent light of the motel room, I pulled out my phone and did what anyone would do in the digital age. I started searching. It didn't take long to find her on Ryan's social media. Madison Carter, a financial analyst who had joined his firm about 10 months ago. Her profile was mostly professional, but there were company event photos where she and Ryan stood just slightly too close together, smiling just a bit too warmly at each other. I dug deeper, noting the timestamps on photos where either of them had checked in at restaurants or events. There was a distinct pattern going back 8 months. When Ryan posted about being at a team dinner, Madison would check in at the same restaurant. When he had business trips to Portland, Chicago, or San Francisco, she would post scenic photos from the same cities on the same dates. The timeline matched perfectly with the changes I'd noticed in our marriage. 8 months ago was when Ryan had started working later, when the emotional distance had begun, when the new cologne had appeared. I thought of all the nights I'd waited up for him, all the weekends I'd spent alone while he attended emergency meetings. I thought of the intimate conversations I'd tried to initiate only to be met with distraction or dismissal. In the stark motel room, surrounded by evidence of my husband's betrayal, I finally broke down. I cried until my throat was raw, until my eyes burned, until there seemed to be no tears left. Then I grew angry. At Ryan, at Madison, but mostly at myself, for not seeing what was happening sooner, for making excuses for his behavior, for doubting my own instincts. I was tempted to drive back to the A-frame and confront them immediately, to pound on the door and create the kind of scene that would leave no doubt about my feelings. But some still rational part of my brain held me back. I needed to be strategic, not reactive. I needed to see this through with dignity. I texted Ryan, "How's your mom doing? Is she still in the hospital?" My hands shook as I hit send, knowing I was giving him another opportunity to lie to me. His response came quickly. "She's stable, but they're keeping her overnight for observation. Jessica finally showed up. I'll probably stay at Mom's place tonight." The casual way he maintained the lie made me feel physically ill. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. This was calculated deception that had been going on for months. This was the systematic dismantling of our marriage while he built a parallel relationship. I barely slept that night, staring at the water-stained ceiling of the motel room, while my mind replayed every suspicious moment from the past 8 months, now seeing them with painful clarity. By morning, I had made my decision. I would confront them, but on my terms, not in a reactive emotional outburst. I drove back to the A-frame around 9 in the morning. Their cars were still there, and I could see movement behind the large windows. I parked directly behind Ryan's car, blocking him in, and walked to the front door. My heart was pounding, but I felt strangely calm, as if I were watching myself in a movie. I knocked firmly. Through the glass panels beside the door, I saw them in the kitchen. They were making breakfast together, laughing about something. Ryan was wearing the sweatpants I'd given him last Christmas. Madison was in what appeared to be one of his shirts. The domesticity of the scene was another wound. Ryan's face when he opened the door and saw me standing there is something I'll never forget. Pure shock, followed by panic, followed by a desperate attempt to control the situation. "Amber," he said, his voice strained. "What are you doing here?" "Interesting question," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I thought I'd check on your mom, but it seems she's made a miraculous recovery. In fact, she was never sick at all, was she?" Madison appeared behind him, confusion clear on her face. "Ryan, what's going on? Who is this?" "This is Amber," I said before he could speak. "His wife." The color drained from her face. "Wife, you said you were divorced. You said the paperwork was being finalized." That revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only was he cheating, but he had erased me entirely from his narrative. Ryan stepped onto the porch, pulling the door nearly closed behind him, as if he could somehow keep his two worlds separate. "Amber, let me explain. This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" I said, "because it looks like you lied about your mother being ill, so you could spend the weekend with your girlfriend at a beach house. It looks like you've been lying to me for months." "Madison is just a colleague," he started, but I cut him off. "Don't. I followed you yesterday. I saw everything, and I found all the evidence of your trips together going back 8 months. 8 months, Ryan." His attempts at denial collapsed. On the street below, a couple walking their dog slowed to watch the unfolding drama. Ryan noticed them too and lowered his voice, suddenly concerned about appearances. "Can we talk about this privately, please? Like how you've been privately dismantling our marriage." My voice was rising, despite my determination to stay calm. "Like how you've been privately building a relationship with her while lying to my face every day." Madison pushed the door open wider. "I had no idea he was still married," she said, her voice shaking. "He told me you were separated, that you'd grown apart years ago and were just finalizing the legal details." Ryan looked trapped between us, his carefully constructed double life collapsing in real time. "Madison, please let me handle this." "Handle this?" I repeated. "Like you've been handling our marriage. Like you've been handling your mother's fictional illness." The neighbors were openly watching now. Ryan's face reddened with embarrassment or anger or both. "I was going to tell you," he said desperately. "I just needed to figure things out first." "Figure what out? How to keep lying to both of us? How to maintain 2 relationships? How to avoid consequences?" Madison had retreated inside, visibly upset. I could hear her moving around, presumably gathering her things. Ryan's desperation grew as he realized both women in his life were slipping away simultaneously. "Amber, please, we can work through this. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." That last part, that was when I knew with absolute certainty that our marriage was over. Not just because of the affair, but because of the ease with which he could diminish it to try to save himself. Either he was lying to me now, claiming his relationship with Madison meant nothing when it clearly did, or he was the kind of man who would use and discard a woman's feelings when convenient. Either way, he wasn't the person I thought I'd married. "I'm going home," I said quietly. "Don't follow me. Don't call me. Have your things out of the house by the end of the week." I turned and walked back to my car, my head high despite the tears threatening to spill over. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Ryan in my rearview mirror, standing alone on the porch of the beach house, looking lost. The man I had loved, trusted, built a life with suddenly revealed as a stranger. The drive home felt surreal, like I was floating above myself watching someone else navigate the coastal highway back to Seattle. I remember very little of those 3 hours, except the constant buzz of my phone as Ryan called repeatedly. I let each call go to voicemail. There was nothing left to say. Our house, when I finally arrived, felt both familiar and strange, like returning to a place you once lived long ago. I walked through the rooms, seeing everything differently. The framed photos of our wedding day, our smiling faces now seeming like strangers. The couch where we'd cuddled watching movies now just furniture. The bed we'd shared now unthinkable to sleep in. Ryan's calls continued interspersed with increasingly desperate texts, "Please talk to me." "It's not what you think. I made a terrible mistake. I love you, not her. Let me explain." I silenced my phone and called the one person I knew would come immediately, Jessica. Our conversation was brief. I told her what happened, and she was at my door within an hour despite living across town. "I'm so sorry," she said as she hugged me. "I had no idea. If I'd suspected anything, I would have told you." "I know," I said, and I did. Jessica had always been straightforward and loyal. The fact that she was Ryan's sister made her immediate support all the more meaningful. Together, we packed a suitcase of my essentials: clothes, toiletries, important documents, my laptop and design equipment. Jessica suggested I stay with her, but the thought of being in Portland, potentially running into Ryan when he inevitably visited his mother, was unbearable. Instead, I called Natalie, my closest friend in Seattle, who immediately offered her spare room. "Stay as long as you need," she said. "No timeline, no pressure." I was loading my things into my car when Ryan finally returned, his face-haggard eyes red. He jumped out of his car the moment he saw me packing. "Amber, please," he said, reaching for me. "Please don't go. We can work through this." I stepped back from his touch. "There's nothing to work through. You've been living a double life for 8 months. You erased me, told her we were divorced. It's over." Jessica emerged from the house with another bag of my belongings. Ryan looked shocked to see his sister there. "Jess, what are you doing here?" "Supporting Amber," she said coldly. "Someone needs to." His face crumpled at his sister's obvious judgment. "You don't understand. It just happened. I never meant to hurt anyone." "It just happened. For 8 months." Jessica's voice was sharp. "You lied about Mom being sick, Ryan. That's beyond low." He flinched at her words but turned back to me desperate. "Madison ended things when she found out the truth. She's gone. It's over with her." So Madison had had more integrity than my husband walking away when she discovered she was part of a deception. The knowledge gave me no satisfaction. "It doesn't matter," I told him. "Even if she's gone, so is my trust in you. So is our marriage." "Please don't say that," he begged. "I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want." But looking at him, this man who had systematically lied to me for the better part of a year, who had created elaborate fictions about his mother's health to facilitate his betrayal, who had only stopped because he was caught, I felt nothing but a dull ache where love had been. "I'll be in touch through a lawyer," I said, getting into my car. Jessica squeezed my shoulder in support before closing the door. As I drove away, I saw Ryan in my rearview mirror again, this time with Jessica confronting him on our driveway. I felt a flash of gratitude that despite losing my husband, I hadn't lost his sister. The next weeks were a blur of practical matters and emotional fallout. I met with a divorce attorney, a gentle but firm woman who guided me through the process with compassion. Ryan's attempts to contact me continued. Flowers delivered to Natalie's apartment, handwritten letters, even showing up at a coffee shop I frequented near my design studio. Each time I maintained the boundary I'd established. Our communication would be through lawyers only. Dividing our life was painful in ways I hadn't anticipated. Friends took sides, some mutual acquaintances awkwardly trying to maintain relationships with both of us. Others, particularly couples we'd been close with, drifted away entirely, as if divorce were contagious. The financial entanglement of 6 years of marriage proved complex to unravel. The house we'd bought together would need to be sold, our savings divided. The worst was telling my parents. My mother cried, having welcomed Ryan as a son. My father, usually even-tempered, was furious, threatening to have a word with Ryan until I convinced him it would only make things worse. I struggled with basic functioning at first. Sleeping in a strange bed in Natalie's apartment, I'd wake at the slightest sound. My work suffered as I found it difficult to focus on design problems when my personal life was in shambles. Financial worries plagued me as I faced an uncertain future as a single woman again, Seattle's cost of living challenging on one income. The first holiday season alone was particularly difficult. Ryan and I had established traditions, picking out a tree together, hosting a Christmas Eve dinner for friends, exchanging one gift on Christmas morning, before joining his family later in the day. Instead, I spent a quiet Christmas with my parents, trying to be present while feeling like a shadow of myself. In a particularly cruel twist of timing, the divorce papers arrived on what would have been our 7th anniversary. I sat on Natalie's couch, staring at the legal document that would formally end the relationship I'd thought would last forever, and felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. That night, I allowed myself one last evening of mourning what I'd lost. I looked through old photos, read old cards from Ryan, and cried until I had no tears left. Then I put it all in a box, sealed it, and made a promise to myself that from tomorrow onward, I would focus not on what was behind me, but on what lay ahead. 6 months after discovering Ryan's betrayal, I stood in the middle of my new apartment, surrounded by moving boxes and the beginnings of a new life. The place was smaller than the house I'd shared with Ryan, a 1-bedroom in a converted warehouse in Capitol Hill, with exposed brick walls and large windows that flooded the space with light. It was entirely mine, decorated according to my taste alone, a physical manifestation of my reclaimed independence. The healing process had been neither linear nor easy. There were days when grief ambushed me in the cereal aisle of the grocery store, or when anger flared so hot I had to pull my car over until I could breathe normally again. There were nights when loneliness felt like a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. But there were also moments of unexpected joy, of rediscovering parts of myself that had been subsumed in marriage. Therapy had been essential to my recovery. My therapist, Dr. Levine, helped me understand that while Ryan's betrayal wasn't my fault, there were patterns in our relationship that I needed to recognize to avoid repeating them. I'd given away too much of myself, ignored warning signs, prioritized his needs over my own. These realizations weren't about blaming myself, but about empowering myself for the future. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during my marriage, women whose company Ryan had subtly discouraged. Lisa, my college roommate, and I started a monthly dinner tradition. Maria, a former colleague, invited me to join her book club. These renewed friendships reminded me that I was more than just someone's wife, more than just a betrayed woman. I also joined a support group for divorced women, initially skeptical, but ultimately grateful for the community of women who truly understood what I was going through. In that safe space, I could express the complicated emotions of divorce without judgment, the humiliation, the rage, the fear, but also the relief and emerging sense of possibility. My professional life took an unexpected turn as well. After years of working for various clients, I decided to establish my own graphic design business. The risk was terrifying, but exhilarating. I converted a corner of my new apartment into a home office, created a portfolio website, and reached out to contacts I'd made over the years. To my surprise, work started coming in steadily, clients appreciating my direct communication and personalized approach. Dating again was another frontier one I approached with extreme caution. My first attempt was a disaster. A coffee date with a friend of Natalie's that left me crying in my car afterward, not because he was unkind, but because the entire experience felt so foreign, so wrong. I decided to take more time for myself before trying again. Through it all, Jessica remained a constant support, our friendship surviving the divorce. We met for lunch one rainy afternoon in April, and I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. "How's Ryan doing?" I wasn't sure why I asked or what answer I was hoping for. Jessica sighed. "He's dating someone new, some woman from his gym. Mom's thrilled, of course. She's been pushing him to move on since the divorce was finalized." I was surprised by my reaction. A brief, sharp pain quickly followed by something like indifference. "Good for him," I said, and meant it. "Are you okay?" Jessica asked carefully. Hearing that, I considered the question seriously. "I am, actually. It doesn't hurt like I thought it would." And it was true. The news of Ryan dating someone new didn't devastate me. It didn't even particularly interest me. He was becoming a character in my past rather than a central figure in my present. That realization was profoundly liberating. I wasn't defined by his betrayal anymore. I wasn't Ryan's ex-wife or the woman who was cheated on. I was just Amber building a life on my terms. Looking back, I could see the warning signs I'd ignored. His sudden password changes on devices, the unexplained expenses, the emotional withdrawal, the defensive reactions when questioned. I'd dismissed my intuition, made excuses for his behavior, chosen to believe the best about him despite evidence to the contrary. These weren't mistakes I would make again. The most valuable lesson from the ordeal was learning to trust myself above all others. My instincts had been correct all along. I'd sensed something was wrong long before I had concrete evidence. That inner knowing would guide me forward, a compass I'd never again ignore. I found unexpected peace and solitude in the simple pleasure of making decisions without consultation or compromise. What to eat for dinner, what movie to watch, what color to paint the bedroom. All choices that were entirely mine. After years of coupledom, this self-sufficiency felt like a superpower. My apartment became a sanctuary filled with things that brought me joy. Plants cascading from macrame hangers, art from local creators, books I'd always meant to read but never found time for. I hosted small gatherings for friends, cooking elaborate meals in my tiny kitchen, filling the space with laughter and conversation. On my 33rd birthday, standing among these friends who had helped rebuild me, I realized something profound. I wouldn't change what happened. As painful as Ryan's betrayal had been, it had led me here to this stronger, more authentic version of myself. The marriage I thought I wanted wasn't what I needed. The life I was building now, brick by uncertain brick, was far more meaningful because it was truly mine. That's the thing about betrayal. It breaks you open. But in that breaking, there's an opportunity to put yourself back together differently, more authentically, with greater wisdom and compassion. The breaking isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a different one. So, if you're watching this and you're in that broken place right now, know that the pain won't last forever. Know that who you become after betrayal can be stronger, wiser, and more authentic than who you were before. Trust yourself, honor your intuition, and remember that the end of one chapter is just the beginning of another. Have you ever experienced a moment when your intuition was screaming at you, but you ignored it? What did you learn from that experience? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories of resilience and growth. Share this with someone who might need to hear that there's life after betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings.